The deadliest weapon of a Golden Age pirate wasn't a cutlass or a cannon. It was a piece of cloth, an ordinary flag. This flag allowed a handful of men on a tiny sloop to get right next to a war galleon with 100 cannons and take it down in 10 minutes. It was a psychological trick that turned friendliness into a deadly trap. A captain's single moment of hesitation decided the fate of hundreds of lives. The pirate flag wasn't a single unified symbol. Blackbeard's flag, for example, depicted a skeleton spearing a bleeding heart. This wasn't just a symbol. It was a brand of terror that did its job before the first shot was even fired. Picture the contrast. On one side, a massive merchant ship, a floating fortress. On the other, a small, fast pirate sloop. A direct confrontation was suicide for the pirates. The odds were 100 to 1. But they won. This wasn't magic. It was cold, hard calculation. Pirates were like a wasp taking down a buffalo. It doesn't go head-to-head. It uses speed and surprise to strike at the most vulnerable spots. A sloop with 12 cannons against a galleon with 60 was exactly that wasp. Experienced captains, veterans of naval battles, fell into the same trap time and again. This was 18th century social engineering. The pirate ship was a phishing email. The friendly flag was a fake address from your bank. A distress signal was an urgent message that your account was locked. And the ships closing in, that was the moment you clicked the malicious link. In the Caribbean, trust was the most dangerous currency. To understand this scam, you have to see the world through the eyes of a pirate's victim. Imagine the captain of a merchant galleon. His ship isn't just a vessel, it's a multi-level fortress. High sides made boarding suicidal for attackers. Dozens of cannons were ready to turn any ship into splinters with a single volley. On board, he had his crew and a detachment of Marines trained to kill. Attacking it head-on was like punching a stone wall. The oak hulls of a Spanish galleon could be 2 feet thick, impervious to small pirate cannons. It was a floating castle tower from which soldiers fired down like archers from the walls. It wasn't just about size, it was about physics. The range and accuracy of a large ship's cannons far outmatched those of the pirates. A galleon's captain could keep an enemy at a distance, methodically blasting it to pieces. It was a sniper versus a man with a shotgun. The captain of a frigate with his 24-pounder cannons was the sniper, hitting targets from a mile away. The pirate with his 6-pounders was the guy with the shotgun. He had to get close. The entire pirate strategy was built on one thing: how to close that distance undetected. And this is where psychology comes in. The captain of a large vessel thinks in terms of defense and superiority. His mission is to deliver the cargo. He avoids risk. He is confident in his strength. His brain scans for threats but filters them by size. A small ship under a friendly flag simply doesn't register as a mortal danger. This is a cognitive error upon which pirates built their entire empire. It has a scientific name: normalcy bias. The captain's brain is programmed to expect a blow from an equal foe, not from a ragged crew on a sloop. So we have an impregnable fortress, and a captain blinded by his own invincibility. To breach this system, the pirates needed a key. But this key wasn't made of steel. It was woven from lies. It was the master password to the human brain. The pirates understood that hacking the operating system in the captain's head was far easier than breaking through a 2-foot oak hull. This master password was visual deception. 99% of the time, a pirate ship sailed not under the skull and bones, but under the flag of Spain, England, or France. This was a standard military ruse, a ruse de guerre, a tactic used even by admirals of royal navies. But there was one gentleman's rule. You had to raise your true colors before opening fire. Pirates flouted this rule. They would lower the false flag and fire in the same second. There was no time to react, no chance to defend. But simply looking like one of their own wasn't enough. They had to make the victim close the distance for them. To do this, pirates staged a performance. Tattered sails, a wisp of smoke from the deck, signals for fresh water. This was an appeal to the unwritten law of the sea: help those in distress. To refuse was a disgrace. Sometimes pirates went further. They would dress a few men in women's clothing and place them on deck. They would wave, shout, and plead for help. This transformed the victim captain from a simple sailor into a knightly rescuer. And knights don't think about threats, they think about heroic deeds. Put yourself in his place. You see a small ship flying your country's flag. It's in trouble. Your instinct is to help. Pirates built their business on this instinct. They weren't hacking technology, they were hacking human nature. Refusing to help at sea in the 18th century was a lifelong stain on one's reputation. In port, you'd be called a coward. No sailor would ever serve under your command again. The pirates put the captain in a situation where the risk of social shame seemed more real than the minuscule chance of an attack. When the brain sees familiar signals, a friendly flag, a plea for help, it enters a cognitive tunnel. It stops analyzing details and operates on a script. The captain sees what he expects to see. He doesn't notice the extra men hiding behind the bulwarks. He doesn't see the camouflaged gun ports. This is the famous invisible gorilla effect. The captain is so focused on the rescue mission that he literally doesn't see the pirates preparing grappling hooks right under his nose. The trap has sprung long before the first shot. And so, the victim sails willingly into the predator's embrace. Its cannons are silent. Its crew isn't preparing for a fight. They're preparing to throw rescue lines. The pirate sloop comes alongside. Everything up to this point was a misdirection, like an illusionist's trick. The spectator captain watches the beautiful assistant, the distress signal, while the magician pirate prepares the main act. Now, the finale begins. Swift, bloody, and completely unexpected. The friendly flag drops. The Jolly Roger is hoisted with a snap. This isn't just a change of symbols. It's a cognitive break. Shock, paralysis, disbelief. The crew has 2 seconds to process what's happening, and those 2 seconds decide everything. Bartholomew Roberts's flag wasn't just a threat, it was a personal vendetta. It depicted him standing on 2 skulls. Under one were the initials ABH, a Barbadian's head. Under the other, AMH, a Martinican's head. It was a direct message to the governors who were hunting him. The flag said, "Yes, it's me, and I've come for you." While the victim captain's brain was rebooting, the pirate cannons were already speaking, and they weren't aiming for the hull. That was foolish and unprofitable. Their first target was to immobilize and blind the giant. For this, they used chain shot, 2 cannonballs linked by a chain. Spinning through the air, this projectile became a giant razor. It severed rigging, tore sails, and shattered spars. They acted not like butchers, but like surgeons. Instead of breaking the bones of the hull, they severed the ship's Achilles tendons, its rigging, with one precise cut. The ship remained intact but was paralyzed, a ready-made prize, not a pile of wreckage. The second volley was for the men, grapeshot, essentially a giant shotgun shell. The cannon spewed hundreds of small fragments, nails and pieces of metal. The goal wasn't to kill everyone, the goal was to create hell on deck. The screams of the wounded, panic, chaos. The captain lost control of his crew. It was an 18th century stun grenade thrown into a room by a SWAT team before an assault. It doesn't destroy the walls. It blinds, deafens, and disorients everyone inside. The pirates attacked not the ship's iron, but its nervous system. Now, look at it from the perspective of a sailor on the merchant vessel. A minute ago, you were preparing to help a ship in distress. Now, masts are falling and your friends are screaming. You don't know where the attack came from. This isn't a battle. It's a slaughter. You have no reason to die for a London merchant's cargo. Unlike military sailors, you are a hired worker. In such a situation, many chose to surrender. And some even joined the pirates, where the share of the loot was fairer. Once the target is paralyzed and the crew is broken, the boarding begins. Forget the Hollywood stunts of swinging across on ropes. It's cinematic but inefficient. In reality, it was simpler and more brutal. Grappling hooks bit into the victim's hull, pulling the ships tightly together. The pirates then simply ran across planks or jumped from one deck to the other. This wasn't a circus act. It was a swift and furious seizure of space, like storming an enemy trench. The handful of pirates were no longer assaulting a crew, but a demoralized mob. This attack protocol was so effective that it became the hallmark of the golden age of piracy. The pirates had found a zero-day exploit in the operating system of 18th-century maritime trade. For several decades, they exploited it with impunity. But eventually, the system's developers, the empires, released a global security patch, and that patch closed the vulnerability for good. This patch wasn't technology, it was bureaucracy. The admiralties issued strict orders. Captains were forbidden to allow any unidentified vessels to approach them, even under their own country's flag, and even if they were signaling distress. The standard procedure became a warning shot across the bow. If the ship continued to approach, it was to be destroyed without discussion. The British Parliament formalized this in the Cruisers and Convoys Act of 1708. It was the corporate security policy that forbids employees from opening attachments from strangers after a virus attack. Trust was removed from the system. Next, the empires changed their logistics. The most valuable cargoes no longer sailed alone. They were gathered into convoys, dozens of merchant ships protected by one or two naval frigates. Attacking such a group was pure suicide for a pirate sloop. The ocean was no longer a buffet of easy prey. This was the same tactic the Allies would use against German U-boats in 2 world wars, a flock protected by sheepdogs. The principle proved to be universal. In response to pirate cunning, hunter-killer squadrons were created. Fast, well-armed ships whose sole mission was to patrol trade routes and exterminate pirates. They themselves sailed under false flags, pretending to be merchants. They lured pirates into a trap with their own weapon. The famous pirate hunter Woodes Rogers, governor of the Bahamas, masterfully used such decoy vessels, later known as Q-ships. These were warships disguised as defenseless merchantmen. They would let the enemy get close, then suddenly open fire from hidden cannons. The empires had learned to beat the scoundrels at their own game. The systemic approach of the empires broke the individual genius of the pirates. The pirates were like a startup that found a vulnerability and blew up the market. But the corporations, the empires, didn't just copy their technology of deception. They used their limitless resources, fleets, laws, colonies, to push the startup out of the market. The Golden Age ended not because they ran out of desperate men. It ended when the pirate business model became unprofitable. But before the model broke, there were those who perfected it. Bartholomew Black Bart Roberts. He captured over 400 ships, almost always without a fight. His audacity was mathematically precise. Off the coast of Brazil, he spotted a convoy of 42 Portuguese ships. Flying their flag, he simply slipped into formation. He approached the largest vessel, boarded it without a single shot, and at gunpoint forced its captain to point out the richest ship in the fleet. Roberts then calmly sailed to the second victim, plundered it, and left. The military escort never even realized a wolf had just been working inside their flock. If Roberts was a surgeon, Henry Every was a terrorist. His target was the Ganji Sawai, the personal treasure ship of the Indian Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb. The haul was 600,000 pounds, over $100 million in today's money. But this wasn't just a robbery. It was a geopolitical strike. The enraged emperor threatened to expel the British East India Company from India forever. Every's capture became piracy's 9/11. It was then that the British Empire declared the first ever global war on them. Pirate deception was no longer just a tactic. It had become a strategic threat to entire empires. Ultimately, O's pirate tactics boiled down to 3 timeless principles. First, look for vulnerability not in the armor, but in the person. Hack protocols of trust, not walls. Today, this is called asymmetric warfare. It is the logic of cybersecurity. The second principle, the goal of the first strike is not destruction, but paralysis. Create such chaos that the enemy loses the will to fight long before they can strike back. Military theorists would later call this the doctrine of shock and awe. And the third principle, speed is everything. The window of opportunity opened by shock closes in seconds. You must act instantly. Colonel John Boyd would formulate this as the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. The winner is the one who cycles through this loop faster than the opponent. These pirate tricks are studied in military academies today. This strategy made them rich. It also earned them a reputation as dishonorable murderers. And this leaves us with a choice that has no right answer. On one hand, it's a brilliant military strategy that allows the weak to defeat the strong. On the other, it's a cowardly stab in the back based on deceit. But pirates weren't just a gang of thugs. Many of their ships, like Sam Bellamy's Whydah, were among the world's first democracies. The captain was elected by vote. They saw themselves not as thieves, but as fighters against the tyranny of empires. So what was it? The cunning of David challenging Goliath, or the treachery of a wolf in sheep's clothing?